Michael Kellen John Hutchence didn't exactly spring from the typical Australian rock star background. Sure, we often imagine Aussie icons as surfers or beach bums who jam on guitars in the sunshine, but Hutchence's early years had just as many suitcases as surfboards. Born in Sydney on January 22nd, 1960, he arrived as the younger of two kids in a family that didn't immediately scream rock legend in the making. His mother, Patricia Glassop, worked as a makeup artist, conjuring new looks with brushes and color palettes, while his father, Kellen Hutchence, was a businessman. Michael's earliest days were firmly rooted in Australia, but this home base was never set in stone. The family hopped around as his father's business dealings took them from city to city. By the time he was 4, they'd moved to Brisbane, the Queensland capital known for its steamy summers, palm trees, and easygoing vibe. Yet even Brisbane wasn't the final stop. Before long, the Hutchences were boarding a plane for Hong Kong, a neon-lit metropolis crammed with towering skyscrapers and exotic markets, about as far from suburban Australia as you could imagine. Imagine little Michael weaving through crowded Hong Kong streets, absorbing new sounds, smells, and cultures. That swirl of influences might have contributed to the wide-eyed sense of possibility he carried into adulthood. In Hong Kong, a young Michael showed a surprising gift for swimming. Maybe in an alternate universe we'd be talking about Michael Hutchence, the Olympic swimmer, because he was apparently good enough that people saw athletic potential. Fate had other ideas. He suffered a severe arm break, one of those unfortunate twists that can derail a promising sports career. But the physical blow had a silver lining. With the swimming path scrapped, Michael turned to other outlets. He was already developing a love of poetry and expressing himself in creative ways, scribbling words that seemed to dance on the page. That love of poetry would soon evolve into something bigger, songwriting. He also discovered an early knack for performing, even if it was just for a local toy commercial. Yes, that's right. Michael Hutchence's first gig involved performing a song in an ad for a Hong Kong store. Not exactly the stage at Wembley, but it was a taste of the spotlight. He was on camera, delivering a catchy tune about some toy. Trivial as it might seem in retrospect, that commercial heralded the swirl up of possibilities that come with a love for entertaining. And keep in mind that he was still just a kid. He likely had no inkling that decades down the line, he'd be mesmerizing stadiums with his stage presence. But no place was ever permanent for the Hutchences. By 1972, they packed their lives yet again and flew back to Australia. This time, they settled in Belrose, a suburb of Sydney. Maybe it was just time to bring Michael home, or maybe the parents hoped a little stability would do him good. Regardless, that move to Belrose turned out to be a fateful decision for music history because it planted Michael in the orbit of Andrew Ferris. In typical teenage fashion, they met at Davidson High School, introduced in part by a twist involving a potential fight that Andrew diffused. Michael and Andrew struck up a friendship based on a shared obsession, music. While other kids might have been fussing about sports or typical teenage drama, these two were jamming in Andrew's house with Andrew's brothers, Tim and John. That jam session blossomed into the seeds of something extraordinary. Out of those sessions, a band started to take shape, initially called Dr. Dolphin. It was an informal group that included the Ferris brothers, some classmates, and the ever-charismatic Michael Hutchence. Picture them in a suburban Australian garage, sweaty, unpolished, maybe even half-baked at times, but clearly having fun. The combination of Andrew's knack for melody and Michael's magnetic stage presence was undeniable. They were kids with raw talent, playing for the sheer joy of making noise, but they were building the foundation for something that would soon explode on the global stage. Then life happened again. Michael's parents separated in 1975. breaking up the family once more. It was a blow for the teenager who found himself moving to California with his mother and half-sister. The distance separated him from the Ferris brothers, but music sometimes has a way of bringing people back together. While Michael was in California, Tim, John, and Andrew formed a band called the Ferris Brothers, logically featuring Tim on lead guitar, John on drums, and Andrew on keyboards. When Michael eventually returned to Australia, they welcomed him into their new band as the vocalist. Bassist Gary Beers rejoined, and Kirk Pengilly came aboard to handle guitar and sax. The synergy was immediate. They had talent, chemistry, and a lead singer with a glint in his eye that could captivate an entire bar full of strangers. In 1977, the Ferris brothers got a real bona fide gig. On August 16th, they hit the stage at Whale Beach in Sydney. It might sound quaint, but for them, it was a leap into the public eye. Even though the crowd was local, it was a thrill to play under a band name, hammered out on some local marquee, and feel like they were doing more than noodling in a garage. Not long after, they toyed with calling themselves the Vegetables, a name that matched a goofy jam of theirs called We Are the Vegetables. Clearly, they were still figuring out who they wanted to be, both musically and branding-wise. Eventually, they stumbled upon INXS, thanks to a suggestion from someone connected to the Aussie rock band Midnight Oil. The idea was to combine the vibe of the band XTC with the jam brand IXL, conjuring an eye-catching moniker that could read as INXS or INXS. It was short, memorable, and it had that intangible cool factor that soared above the Vegetables. With the new name pinned on them, the group felt a renewed sense of purpose. By the end of 1979, they were ready to churn out material and take on the industry like the unstoppable force they were becoming. From 1980 onward, they were in constant motion. Early singles included Simple Simon, We Are the Vegetables. But a more significant milestone was Just Keep Walking, which garnered some notice on the Australian charts. That same year, they released their self-titled debut album, INXS, in October. Hutchence was the frontman, but he wasn't the sole creative engine. He and Andrew Ferris became the band's key songwriting partnership, delivering track after track that fused pop hooks with a hint of funk, rock crunch, and a dash of new wave energy. Their second album, Underneath the Colors, came out in 1981 with surprising speed, reportedly recorded in under a month. Michael said later that the quick turnaround actually helped them focus. Instead of laboring over every detail, they had to channel that raw excitement and produce a cohesive record without drifting into tangents. It was a pivotal step, proving that INXS could handle the pressures of real studio work on a tighter schedule. Around this time, Michael still found ways to stretch his creativity beyond the band, launching side projects that showcased his ambition. In 1982, he recorded Speed Kills for the film Freedom, marking his first official solo single. By 1986, he'd also caught the acting bug. The film Dogs in Space offered him a starring role, specifically crafted with him in mind. It was a bohemian drama about a group of misfits sharing a house, and it suited Michael's edge. In addition to acting, he contributed tracks to the soundtrack, reaffirming that music was the heartbeat of everything he did, even if he dipped a toe into Hollywood. The year 1986 also brought a massive tour called Australian Made, which corralled several notable Aussie acts for a traveling festival. INXS headlined, bolstered by their swelling popularity. During that tour, Michael reconnected with Chrissy Amphlett of the Divinals, an old friend. She described him as a sweet man who confided his dream of starting a family someday. It was a softer side which might surprise anyone who only knew him as the fiery frontman with the swaggering grin. But the true turning point came in 1987 when INXS dropped their album Kick. Before Kick, they were well known in Australia and steadily gaining traction overseas. After Kick, they were mega stars. The singles Need You Tonight, New Sensation, Devil Inside, and Never Tear Us Apart soared up the charts in multiple countries. Suddenly, they were in constant rotation on MTV, and Michael Hutchence was the archetypal rock god for a new generation. Curly hair, leather pants, mesmerizing eyes, and a voice that dripped with seduction and confidence. Toby Creswell, an Aussie music journalist, once pointed out that the lyrics to Need You Tonight were fairly simple, but Michael's vocal delivery had an entrancing, mysterious quality. The single, combined with the laid-back funk guitar riff, gave INXS a sexy modern edge that set them apart from other big rock acts of the time. When 1988 rolled around, MTV recognized them in a big way. Need You Tonight Immediate took home 5 MTV Video Music Awards. It was a triumph that spotlighted both their musical chops and their flair for memorable visual presentation. Michael had honed his camera presence ever since that humble toy commercial in Hong Kong, and now he was among the reigning kings of music television. Legions of fans worldwide were smitten with him. They called him unbelievably charismatic, someone who could be dancing on stage or simply gazing into the camera, and it was riveting either way. He had that intangible star quality that you can't teach or fake. It simply emanated from him. Amid INXS's success, Michael took another creative leap in 1989 by forming a side project called Max Q with Aussie producer and musician Ollie Olsen. Their one album was a venture into darker, more experimental sounds that diverged from INXS's mainstream radio vibe. Fans and critics lauded the short-lived project for its boldness, praising Michael's willingness to reveal a more shadowy side of his creativity. If INXS was slick and internationally appealing, Max Q offered an edgier counterpart, reflecting that Michael was never content to stand still. He was also known for forging relationships with some of the biggest names in pop culture. In 1990, INXS released the single Suicide Blonde, famously inspired by Michael's then-girlfriend Kylie Minogue. Kylie had described dyeing her hair suicide blonde for a film role, The Delinquents, and the phrase evidently stuck in Michael's mind. Together with Andrew Farriss, he spun it into one of their signature hits. The media feasted on the idea that squeaky clean Kylie Minogue was dating the wild man of rock, as tabloids labeled him. Perhaps it was the contrast that made them so fascinating. Pop princess meets edgy rocker, forging an unlikely bond that enthralled fans on both sides. That same year, 1990, also saw Michael appearing as Percy Shelley in the horror fantasy film Frankenstein Unbound. It was his second big film role after Dogs in Space. While it didn't catapult him into full-scale Hollywood stardom, it proved that his creative appetites were broad. He wanted to explore acting, music, poetry, performance, anything that let him express himself and push the boundaries of what was expected of a rock frontman. By the 1991 Brit Awards, Michael's star was so high that he nabbed the trophy for Best International Male Solo Artist, while INXS snagged Best International Group. That moment solidified their place among the giants of the music scene. Yet fame is a tricky beast, and by 1992, Michael's life took a dark turn. In Copenhagen, he got into a scuffle with an angry taxi driver who reportedly knocked him flat, causing Michael to fracture his skull on the pavement. Ignoring medical advice, he took days to see a doctor. The delay cost him dearly. He lost most of his senses of taste and smell. For someone who thrived on intense sensory experiences, That was devastating. Worse yet, the head injury threw his emotional health into turmoil. According to those close to him, he became prone to fits of rage and extended bouts of depression. The term mercurial fit him more than ever. During recording sessions afterward, he lashed out physically, sometimes brandishing a knife. One particularly chilling story has him threatening his bandmate, Gary Beers, with that knife in the middle of a heated argument. Clearly, this was not the same carefree frontman who'd once charmed the world with his easy smile and big heart. The injury, combined with relentless touring and the pressures of stardom, took its toll, fueling an erratic, edgy side of Michael that distressed even those who loved him most. Meanwhile, the musical momentum also started shifting. In 1993, INXS released Full Moon, Dirty Hearts to a lukewarm reception. The wave of blockbusters from Kick and X had crested, and fans and critics alike weren't quite as enraptured by the new material. The band's once frantic schedule calmed down. They had a little more space to step back. For Michael, that downtime didn't necessarily mean rest. He was always on the move, either chasing new creative projects or plunging into intense relationships. The tabloids labeled him a serial dater, linking him with famous women like Belinda Carlisle, model Helena Christensen, and actress Kim Wilson. He had a reputation as the wild man of rock. It encompassed everything from sexual bravado to well-known substance use, from bar fights to flamboyant paparazzi-fueled escapades. But by the mid-90s, the biggest relationship storm was about to begin. Michael reconnected with British TV personality Paula Yates, whom he'd first met in 1985. At the time, she was married to musician and Live Aid organizer Bob Geldof, with whom she shared 3 daughters. When Paula and Michael's liaison was exposed, the press went wild. Tabloid photographers hounded them, and Michael's temper sometimes boiled over, leading to scuffles with paparazzi. Yet neither Paula nor Michael seemed inclined to hide. They persisted, eventually confirming that they were together. In 1996, Paula gave birth to their daughter, Heavenly Hirani Tiger Lily for short. Michael was overjoyed at being a father, even though the situation was complicated by Paula's ongoing marital disputes with Geldof. Her divorce from him wasn't finalized until a few months before Tiger Lily arrived. Michael and Paula's scandal only solidified his bad boy mystique. Then, in late 1996, they faced another blow. Their nanny alleged she'd discovered opium stashed under their bed. Hutchence and Yates ended up in police custody for a short time, but the charges were dropped for lack of evidence. It was just another drama in a string of dramas swirling around Michael, whose image as a rock and roll rebel was no longer just a stage persona, but an all-encompassing reality. He was living it 24/7, sometimes dangerously close to going off the rails. Despite the personal chaos, Michael still had enough focus to work on music. INXS put out Elegantly Wasted in April 1997 and planned a major world tour. They were determined to revive their fortunes, recapturing some of the old spark that had once made them unstoppable. Throughout that year, Michael was traveling, performing, and anticipating a bright new chapter for the band he had fronted since his teenage years. But behind the scenes, money pressures, custody battles, and Michael's lingering depression created a perfect storm of stress. He desperately wanted Paula and Tiger Lily, and Paula's 3 daughters, to join him in Australia, but Bob Geldof had secured a legal maneuver that postponed the children's travel. Michael was apparently inconsolable when he learned the visitation was blocked. On November 22nd, 1997, everything unraveled. Michael Hutchence was found dead in his Sydney hotel room by a maid who stepped in after he failed to check out. He was just 37 years old. The immediate cause was a suspected suicide, and toxicology reports later showed a cocktail of drugs and alcohol. Tributes poured in from stunned fans and fellow musicians around the globe. It felt surreal that this rock star, still in his prime, had extinguished his own light so suddenly, and in a manner that seemed to reflect the emotional turmoil he'd endured in recent years. Investigations into his final hours revealed that he had spent the night before calling Paula Yates, as well as Bob Geldof, and ex-girlfriend Michelle Bennett trying to persuade Geldof to let Paula and the children travel. Geldof refused. Witnesses, like the occupant in the next room, reported hearing Michael shouting or crying during phone calls in those early hours. Michelle Bennett was so worried after speaking with him that she drove to the hotel to check on him. She knocked on his door, but there was no response. By then, it was too late. In the aftermath, his funeral was held on November 27, 1997, at St. Andrew's Cathedral in Sydney. 600 mourners attended in person, and countless more watched the live broadcast on Australian television. Among those present were the entire INXS family, plus ex-partners like Helena Christensen and Kylie Minogue, who wept at the loss of someone who had once been an integral part of their lives. Close friend Nick Cave performed a stripped-down version of Into My Arms, ensuring that the broadcast cameras didn't capture his grief. As the service ended, Michael's bandmates and his younger brother Rhett carried the coffin out of the cathedral. His remains were cremated, and his ashes were divided among Paula Yates and Tiger Lily, his siblings, and his parents. Paula, devastated, famously placed some of his ashes into a pouch that she would sleep with, unable to let go of the man she loved. Tragically, Paula Yates herself died 3 years later from an accidental overdose, leaving Tiger Lily an orphan at just 4 years old. Bob Geldof took Tiger Lily in, eventually adopting her and raising her alongside her half-sisters. While Michael's entire estate was entangled in legal complications and contested wills, the undeniable truth remained. A child had lost her father, and the rock world had lost one of its most captivating frontmen. To this day, fans and critics are torn between celebrating Michael's on-stage brilliance and lamenting the self-destructive impulses that overshadowed his final years. Toby Creswell, the music writer who analyzed INXS's hits, once called Hutchence, without question, one of the truly great frontmen. Look at any live performance, especially from the Kick era, and you'll see why. Michael exuded swagger without seeming forced. He'd sashay across the stage in black leather, hair swirling, mesmerizing tens of thousands of fans like a Pied Piper of dance rock. Younger artists saw him as a blueprint for how to be both mainstream and edgy, both rock solid and a bit mysterious. Even if you'd never heard of INXS, the moment you watched him command a crowd, you felt that intangible spark of star power. It wasn't just his voice or his looks. It was an entire aura that spelled out pure confidence. He was also, by many accounts, a sensitive soul who channeled personal experiences into lyrics that could be teasing, cryptic, or heartbreakingly direct, whether it was the lonely ache of Never Tear Us Apart or the sultry push of Need You Tonight. He had a way of singing that felt personal, almost like a secret shared directly with the listener. That was the dynamic that enthralled so many fans, especially in an era dominated by either flamboyant hair metal or squeaky clean pop. Michael managed to straddle that line between rebellious rock star and seductive pop icon with ease. His posthumous reputation is every bit as chaotic as his life. There have been rumors and conspiracies about the circumstances of his death, some suggesting it was a tragic accident rather than suicide. The official coroner's report, however, concluded that it was indeed a suicide, likely fueled by a swirl of alcohol, drugs, and intense emotional distress. The heartbreak surrounding that final act is magnified when you realize that he was about to embark on a new chapter with the band, that he wanted nothing more than to see Paula and the children, and that he had recently become a father himself. When you stand back and look at the whole tapestry, Michael Hutchence's story feels almost cinematic. A bright, energetic child shaped by international travels, a pivot from potential athletic stardom to music, a meteoric rise to global fame, a series of tumultuous love affairs, violent scrapes with paparazzi, drug-fueled partying, deeper creative forays into acting, and finally a tragic end in a lonely hotel room. It's no wonder that multiple documentaries and books have tried to capture his essence. Each time they circle back to that core duality, the hypnotic performer who can make a stadium sway versus the deeply troubled soul who grappled with depression and anger after a traumatic brain injury. He left behind a catalog of music that still resonates. INXS's greatest hits like Devil Inside, What You Need, Never Tear Us Apart, and Disappear continue to find new fans, thanks to streaming platforms and recurring appearances on pop culture soundtracks. Younger generations discover these tracks and wonder, who was that singer with the husky voice? They see the old music videos, Michael swirling around in black jeans, exuding effortless magnetism, and they become entranced too, decades later. For those fans, it's like discovering an alternate dimension in which rock was cooler, sexier, and more adventurous. If you check out Dogs in Space, you'll see a young Michael playing a punkish singer in a messy share house, eerily close to what might have been a real parallel to his life at certain points. Or watch an interview from the height of INXS mania, and notice how casually he leans back, smirking, flipping his hair, answering questions with a blend of charm and aloofness. He carried that intangible cool factor without apparently trying. It drew fans to him like moths to a flame. Even bandmates recognized how big a role he played in their success. Sure, Andrew Ferris co-wrote the songs, but Michael was the face, the mouth, the body, the attitude. On stage, it was his show to run, and audiences ate it up. But that was the blessing and the curse. He existed in a swirling fishbowl, always under scrutiny. The tabloids relished every public meltdown, every rumor of drug use, every scuffle with a photographer, and every new romance with a high-profile woman. By the time he got involved with Paula Yates, the press was unrelenting. The narrative switched from hunky Aussie star dating pop princess Kylie Minogue to dangerous homewrecker hooking up with Paula Yates. He was never out of the headlines, and sometimes that overshadowed his artistry. He also had difficulty coping with the pressures that battered him from every side, the demands of fame, the emotional roller coaster of multiple relationships, and the unhealed trauma of losing his senses of smell and taste in that Copenhagen incident. Still, when the final ledger is tallied, the scale tips in favor of his contributions, not his failings. Michael Hutchence gave the music world a swagger that was part funk, part rock, part soul, part pop, and all magnetism. He set a standard for frontmen that remains challenging to replicate, even in a modern era where everything is bigger, louder, and more extreme. He showed that rock vocals could be silky and raw at the same time, that stage presence could be both commanding and intimate. His artistry shone in the anthems that still pump through speakers all over the world, whether in clubs, radio stations, or personal playlists. His legacy endures not just in music, but in the memory of fans who recall moments like that iconic 1988 MTV VMAs performance, or the day they first saw the Need You Tonight video and felt something they couldn't quite explain, or the rumor mills that churned around him and Paula Yates, swirling with scandal and heartbreak, or the grief they felt when news broke of his death, and how the world collectively paused to say, "We've lost someone special." Even the details surrounding his passing underscore the tragedy. He died alone, with the phone still a symbol of his last-ditch attempts to fix an impossible situation. He'd pleaded with Bob Geldof to let Paula and her daughters travel. It didn't happen. He was a father who couldn't see his little girl, a partner who felt powerless, an artist who'd lost the full capacity of his senses, a rock star with nowhere to turn. Mix in a night of alcohol and drugs, and it resulted in that final, irreversible act. Whenever the conversation about Michael Hutchence arises, the question lingers. Could anyone have saved him? Would it have made a difference if Paula Yates had arrived one day earlier? If that lawsuit for custody had gone differently? If the doctors had treated his head injury more effectively back in 1992? We can only speculate. What we know for sure is that Michael was a walking contradiction. He burned bright with talent and at the same time wrestled with inner demons. That contradiction made him all the more compelling to watch. In the 21st century, his daughter Tiger Lily has grown up, largely shielded from the public eye by Bob Geldof, who adopted her after Paula Yates's death. Fans sometimes wonder if she has her father's creative spark or if she wants to follow a different path entirely. She inherited an enormous legacy without having any real memories of the man behind it. Yet the music, the interviews, the videos, and all those personal accounts from friends and family ensure that she and the rest of the world can piece together who he was. Ultimately, Michael Hutchence stands as a testament to the precarious balance between fame and vulnerability. He soared so high, landing on top of the charts and winning over hearts, but behind the scenes, he was wrestling with heartbreak, frustration, physical agony, addiction, and emotional instability. He was the ultimate rock star, mysterious, attractive, talented, sometimes tempestuous, sometimes tender. That made him fascinating, but it also fed into his self-destruction. Still, we're left with the music, which is perhaps the greatest gift he ever gave. Listen to Never Tear Us Apart, and soak in that romantic earnestness that overflows in each note. Crank up New Sensation to feel the high-voltage charge of an 80s party anthem, or get lost in the seductive rhythms of Need You Tonight with Michael's low, breathy come on. Each track is a snapshot of a man who could switch from soulful crooner to flamboyant rocker in the space of a few lines. That vocal range of mood and technique anchored INXS's success, carrying them to stadiums across the globe. And if you close your eyes, you might still picture him on stage, shirt open, microphone in hand, working the crowd with that mix of confidence and playfulness, perfectly aware that thousands of eyes were locked on his every move. Even Toby Creswell's words ring true. Michael Hutchence was indeed one of the great frontmen in rock history. Certainly other big personalities graced that era, Bono, Freddie Mercury, David Bowie, but Michael's brand of sensuality and laid-back Aussie charm was in a category all its own. He bridged mainstream pop rock with an undercurrent of something darker and more dangerous, forging a style that was both accessible and edgy. The fact that he did it while facing internal struggles only heightens the legend, presenting him as a flawed icon, a beloved figure who was as human as the rest of us, heartbreaks and all. It's that very humanity that draws us back to him time and time again. He was the kid who splashed in the waters of Hong Kong, the teenager who hopped from continent to continent, the budding musician who cut his teeth in small Australian gigs, the global star who commanded some of the biggest stages of his era, and the troubled soul who spent his final moments in a haze of loneliness and desperation. To see that entire arc laid out is to understand how swiftly joy and triumph can turn into sorrow. But for now, let's remember the roar of the crowd and the spotlight capturing Michael's grin. Picture him in the prime of his life wearing a sly smile as he slides into the vocals of Devil Inside. Imagine the swirl of neon lights, the pounding drums, and that intangible energy that crackled whenever he stepped on stage. That moment is pure and timeless, lodged deep in the collective memory of rock fans everywhere. And in that moment, Michael Hutchence remains eternally vibrant, a reminder that sometimes even the brightest stars can burn out far too soon. So if you ever stumble upon an old INXS video or an interview snippet, pause for a second to appreciate the complicated brilliance of Michael Hutchence. He was more than a frontman. He was a lightning rod for creativity, drama, passion, and heartbreak, all mashed into one mesmerizing figure. His journey is a roller coaster of highs and lows, reflecting both the intoxicating thrill of fame and the painful toll it can exact on a fragile psyche. There may never be another quite like him. That's why his name still resonates, because he was, in essence, a living, breathing rock and roll saga, one that's still worth telling over and over again, to remind ourselves how fragile and explosive true stardom can be. Michael Hutchence's life had everything: talent, controversy, love, betrayal, triumph, and tragedy. It's raw and complicated and absolutely gripping, like the best movies or novels you've ever experienced. So the next time you cue up Need You Tonight, let yourself be transported back into that world of swirling lights, unstoppable grooves, and a lead singer who made every note feel like a secret whisper. That's Michael Hutchence, forever immortal, forever missed, and forever one of the most dynamic forces to ever stand beneath the stage lights.